Welcome to all. We are in an intimate dimension, an intimate space, but no words. Today we will build and create space with words and with our talk, which is the red thread amongst all of the speeches, all of which start from keywords. The first of which certainly is space. What we are living, we are also starting to populate and animate this space with these words. The second keyword is a meeting, the one we are having now, during which we will try and understand how to engage and involve the environments and architectures in the process of educating individuals. The teaching space is the title of today's meeting. It resonates. For some years, I've been dealing with schools, education, and training. I also lead a radio program. And the teaching space, like I was saying, is a title and a mission that resonates with me and in many experiences about many places, countries, and ages of individuals when we talk about education and training. And it's also, the red thread amongst these experiences that come from near and far. I'll start from far away before giving the floor to our first guest. It's far in time more than in space because some days ago, while I was tidying up my bookshelves in my home, talking about, tidying up spaces, I found the book of Jean-Pierre Vernant, a French philosopher and anthropologist dealing with the culture of the ancient Greeks, and how they thought and how they inhabited spaces. In telling the experience of, a part of the population in Sicily, near the ancient city of Selinunte, not far from Trapani in Sicily, Vernant talks about how the ancient Greeks decided in organizing the polis to leave the center of the polis empty in this particular city near Selinunte, to leave an empty space at the center of the polis with no temples or other architecturally defined places, because that empty space was to be a free space, one to be built with words, which are kind of the two poles in between which we move today. The pole of those who work on words and thoughts by training and educating individuals, and the pole of those who build spaces. An empty space is one you can fill, first of all, with values. And this is also what we're going to talk about today, the values that we want to put in this space. And the ancient Greeks and many later tried to put in these spaces, which become teaching spaces. These are values like inclusion, tolerance, dialogue, discussion. And, these are the key words that will resonate today. I'll start from one of these values. I talked about inclusion, to give the floor to the first guest, Deborah Kayembe. Good morning, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
The rector of the University of Edinburgh since slightly over 1 year.
No, I'm halfway now, so
okay.
Almost 2 years.
Ok, almost 2 years. Allora, ci racconti un po', lei che ha vissuto, ha cercato di declinare.
You have lived and tried to articulate in your life inclusion inside educational processes. Now you do that as rector of your university. So how is it possible to create environments or direct universities and their environments to communicate values such as tolerance and inclusion?
I think we have worked very hard at Edinburgh University trying to get an environment that is inclusive of everyone and people with different backgrounds. Right now, at Edinburgh University, we have what we call Edinburgh Institute, Edinburgh Institute Future Educations, that gives the opportunity to the students and the university to interact in all dimensions of social realities on campus and outside campus. But the Edinburgh Future Institute it's a program which is designed to respond to the need of creation, critical and experimental thinking across schools, not only the University of Edinburgh. So we start with schools, we go to the university and college, and we learn within community and industry organization. So some of the issues that we explore the most is mobility, politics, environmental changes, culture, social justice, and data-driven system to manage the understanding of the world influence and the learning as well as education. So where the student will explore the ways of knowledge through culture and skills and produce and reproduce and see how people and organization system learn to interact and influence the global changing and the changes. So our students have programs that support their ambitions for the future and all the education across all sectors by gaining vital data and creative support for future career. So we apply for innovative methods to build a strong future of education and learning.
You talk about innovative methods that also need innovative spaces. What is the connection between these methods and goals that you've just described on the one hand and the places, spaces, and environments on the other hand?
As you know, we have faced very difficult times the last 2 years with COVID pandemic. So we have given to our students the opportunity to choose either studying online or studying on campus. So in a different level of the course, of course, the course they're taking. So some courses are really easier to get online, but some of them can just not work on online basis system.
Okay.
And then the other exception is the international student, because this one comes with immigration restrictions about the kind of visa they're having. Some kind of visa does not work with the student going online, and some kind of visa only work with students going in person on campus because their presence in the classroom is controlled by immigration restrictions. So we are trying to be very careful about these new ways of teaching. So we are offering hybrid courses where some students are at home watching the lecture or studying at home on rotation movement, so they can come these first 3 weeks, they are on campus, the next 2 weeks they're not on campus, they're out of campus, and they are following online. So which called the new hybrid system that we have at university at home.
Which is an experience that we in Italy will be told by the other guests, by the speakers. We've lived this with the pandemic. That was kind of also an opportunity to dig deeper into these new ways of learning. So the university you had is very old. On your chair also sat Winston Churchill, if I'm not wrong. So how can you talk about the challenge of, allowing such an old traditional place to evolve and to opening up to the most innovative methods?
One thing is certain is that the university now realize it's not really a good thing to be conservative. It's time for the university to be progressive.
Yeah.
So something is certain here. And when it comes to innovation, there's no better champion than myself. And I always think if you want to innovate something, you have to start by example. So that is something, it's up there for everyone. But something I want to say here, the University of Edinburgh is a conservative university, and that is true. But how much of this innovation works for all students equally? This is the challenge. Because you have some students living in some part of the world where there's no electricity, or learning material are not available, where life standards, social standards is not there. So then come the challenge with the speed of studying at Edinburgh University. We have the best material of education. We have too much electricity. We never lack electricity. So when other students are facing the reality of getting the electricity, getting the computer up running, the program was already in the end. So this is a challenge as rector. I have to bring up to management, say, stop right there. We need to catch up with the student. Because no matter how much the student wants to go to this education, she might not have food today. She might be 20 and she's forced to get married when she wants to go to education. So these are the reality of the society. So Edinburgh University now stop right there and say, okay, we are going to give a go to this, to give the disadvantaged the opportunity to have the best education of Edinburgh. And that the will is there, but we need to be patient. It's really a long way to get there.
Last question. Una immagine
An image
le è rimasta
that is
dentro che
still inside you and works as a goal.
Quando lei ha preso in mano,
you know, when you started to work as a rector for the university, what was your goal? Did you have an image that you can use to put together all of the values that you've expressed, including within a space, which is the one of learning and the university where you are today?
When I start working as a rector, with no doubt, number one, compassion. We need to be a society, we need to have a university with compassion throughout the students or throughout our society for those who have been left behind, and try to research to see how much we can reach out to them and give them a go to help them. Secondly, equality. We are all created equal. And me becoming rector of that university was probably a giant path to equality in humanity, but it's a little one. We need to see more coming. I had an interview with the BBC on that day, and they asked me when is going to be the next black rector of Edinburgh University. And I said, I'm hoping it's coming next after me. But we still have to wait there. We still have a long way. And lastly, diversity. We need to welcome everyone, whatever, where they were born, whatever the color of their skin, whatever, where they get the initial education from. And at Edinburgh University for a better world.
Grazie mille.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Deborah Kayembe. I wish you all the best. Thank you for these fundamentals, beautiful, that you've given to us, starting from your personal experience, from your work, or what you do every day as rector of the University of Edinburgh. Let us now try to open up a more historical session. We should have with us Luigi Pulizzy, the president of the Italian Association of Architecture, critic and historian of architecture. Good morning, welcome. Good morning. He dealt with and told us a lot about how architecture can speed up certain processes, about culture, society, leisure time. So, how can architecture, you've studied it in all times, you've also told about it and explained it. So how can architecture accelerate also the processes concerning learning and education, training? So I believe that there are three new things that architecture has to learn. It has to learn them from the present time, from the technologies that is evolving. First one is the disruption of the here and now. Before, architecture used to refer to its own space, which was a fairly static space where things just happened. Today, the example is this very conference. There are some people in person, others are in remote location. And architecture should start learning that, space is at the same time the ancient space, the solid space to which we are used, but also this fluid space of the present time. You can have professors who teach from a remote location, but in order to have this, it's not simply enough to have a screen. You can have teaching that refers to the virtual world and places where you can put all of our work and the work process. So architecture is not just the physical container, but it's also the virtual container that comes with it. You can increase participation and interact. There are applications that allow you to interact in real time while you're speaking. Like, I'm boring you, and you can send me your ideas through your smartphones, texting me and saying, stop to torture me with your chatter. Then you can register, edit, and prepare the lecture. So instead of being a lecture that takes place in that specific moment, it can be well prepared, fine-tuned, with parts that are live and other parts that are prepared. So the disruption of the here and now is a big bet for buildings. The other bet is the increase in software as compared to hardware. Software is increasingly prevailing over hardware. And this means that speed prevails over permanence. Previously, the buildings relied upon their permanence. And the same holds true for machines. They were conceived in order to be static for a certain number of years. But now everything evolves, and this means that we are forced to have great flexibility in spaces. When we think of futuristic things, we do something wrong because the space shuttle images, as a matter of fact, are not that flexible over time. Instead, the bet is to come up with configurations which are particularly flexible, thus allowing this ongoing evolution of software. What you're telling us is, I think, very contemporaneous, most especially if I think of the last 2 years, if I think of these hybrid spaces you were touching upon, and if I think of this intrusion of the digital, including in the learning spaces. This is something that for sure has been accelerated quite a lot in recent years. You've studied the past, you've told us about the past, and, back then we can find some lessons and clues that maybe we have neglected today and that instead can help us give more significance to these processes or make them more robust, quite simply. Well, I believe we should learn from the whole of history, starting from when the philosopher used to walk in the Stoa with the students. And his lesson was a continuous dialogue. And today, this ongoing dialogue is made possible, for example, by the social media, as well as by other things. I do believe that we should be willing and greed to learn from history. Because, the method that we have is that of face-to-face lessons. But this is just one of the many you can have. And in the past, teaching worked differently. But now it no longer works. It works much less than in the past. No, it's not true that it works much less than the past. I teach, I see these youngsters were always very keen while being distracted. They do fantastic things, but you have to be able to stimulate them, and you have to be able to see in these tools possibilities rather than just the negatives. If I tell a young boy who is used to living with his telephone, if I tell him that he has to stop using the phone when he enters the school, and in certain moments that's right, but I mean, in that way, I no longer allow him to have an expansion of his brain that is part of him and us. Just think of what happens. I mean, I'm desperate if my PC breaks down, because in my PC I have so much of my thoughts, of my reasonings, and of the things that are dear to me, including culturally. But interestingly, according to me, when it comes to learning from the past, is one last thing, i.e., the end of Taylorism, the end of the idea of the assembly chain, whereby the school was conceived as an assembly line where you had to work hard. Instead, recently, we are seeing hypotheses of seeing the school as leisure time and joy, and the universities are no longer classrooms. Rather, they are places where you can spend most of the day. They are open round the clock. Does it correspond to the evolution of spaces, this revolution and evolution of the methods? Yes, but also to the evolution of equipment, because if I connect through a PC, it doesn't matter where in the space I am with respect to the library. Previously, if I wanted to read texts, I had to go to the library, and I could read all of the texts I wanted. But now, instead, with ITC, I can read all of the texts I need by laying comfortably in, a lawn, or in the place that I believe is, most empathic with respect to my needs. So, if we are capable of using creatively all of these tools, for sure, the shape of the school building and of the university will change. But this doesn't mean disavowing forms of learning that were tied to the past. The fact of standing still on a desk with a stack of books, that is important and essential as well. But today, many more things are done. You can read books and underline them electronically, or you can do many more things. And all of this does have an impact on the design of spaces, because spaces can no longer be the same. This is due to the fact that, and I guess that you also refer to the design process. Yes, of course, because if I keep thinking of the 19th century school or university, well, quite clearly, I think of a university that worked with means and equipment that were different and didn't take into account these three important things. So the disruption and the end of the here and now, and the end of Taylorism, and the fact that software, so change, has prevailed over hardware.
Senta, prima di lasciarla andare le faccio un'ultima domanda.
One last question before you leave.
C'è un luogo,
is there a place or a space that is stuck in your mind and in which you find many of the dynamics that you've talked to me about, and those clues of something that should happen today and that in part is already happening, studying in the various periods of time or places. I very much love the American universities conceived as campuses. They have anticipated some of these themes. But I believe that most especially this new system of the spaces and teaching is to be invented, but very prudently, because and also with a lot of courage, I add. Yes, and with courage. And we will have evidence of this now. Yes, with prudence and courage. Normally, I only say with courage, so now I add with prudence. Okay, thank you so much, Luigi Pulizzy. Pristinenza Pulizzy. Thank you so much for your contribution. Thank you. So we're talking about goals, prudence, courage, and about what the university and in general the dynamics of learning should offer to the youth. And maybe we should also dwell upon what the institutions can do in this sense. So please, the Honorable Deputy Fusacchia, join me. We will switch guests. Because a couple of months ago, an important thing happened. So at last, with the passing of an act of law, of which you are the proposer, we managed to delete a prohibition that we had had since 1933 in our country, i.e. not being able to enroll to more than one package at a time. Now you can do it. The act of law was passed a couple of months ago. So just how can this contribute towards improving our universities or the curriculum of our students? Well, first of all, we have removed a prohibition that had been with us for 90 years. This is worthy. And it created a lot of discrimination as compared to the universities of the other European countries. We were the only ones to have this fantastic record. So it was a constraint, not an opportunity. What is the cultural value of this act of law, which was approved unanimously by the Parliament and at the initiative of the Parliament, which is fairly peculiar and rare in this period of time. So there's been a convergence of all. The cultural value is for sure the possibility to give the possibility to the youth to enroll to 2 degree courses. But it's not just freedom, every Italian citizen can follow multiple degree courses. But it's a cultural value because we toured Italy with the other MPs to talk about it and promote it. And the feedback was very strong. So we wondered, is it possible that all want multiple degree courses? Yes and no. Many will do, but again, it's cultural value because at the present moment, the idea that the works of the future and the preparation to the future for work and for the creation of enterprises and in life requires to put together knowledge that related to very different disciplines. So, to be clear and simple, we all have memories of when you followed the courses of law and then switched to political scientists. So, but now we are talking about the archaeologist who wants to do information technology, and we are talking about, the lawyer, for example. Many boys and girls who want to defend human rights and maybe want to work with technology. Is it enough to have a degree in law, or do you need to know how the algorithms of the web platforms work? You may have a master or a second degree, of course, but so hybridation of knowledge, yes. The most interesting things will come out of this. Here we're talking about architecture, spaces, how many things should be able to know if you are an architect and deal with spaces, like the president told us a moment ago. So how do we integrate these dimensions? And the rector talked about inclusion. I'm not sure that today this is the case in many degree courses for architecture. I'm not sure that they convey knowledge that can be useful in order to explore forward many other fields. So you said a moment ago that we are laggards. So is there an impact that this act of law can have so that our country becomes more attractive? Yes, it becomes more attractive because we're not doing well. We have a brain drain. We don't attract brains. Yes. Let's say that I'm saying so because I proposed this bill of law. So this is a small act of law, but it is very important. Of course, well, it has its own defects. Having said that, however, I'm saying so because in order to become more attractive for researchers and students, we need many more such provisions. But, it's, an element that we've eliminated. And it was irritating for students, for many boys and girls. Because, those who wanted to study in research in Italy now no longer have this constraint. So with respect to the theme of this meeting, so places and spaces now, we've talked about contents. But talking about the places of learning, are there any goals of politicians with respect to the PNRR, with respect to the funds provided for in Mission 4? So the places of learning. Does this have a role? Yes, absolutely. Two things. First, with respect to the law, I would say that in order to educate professionals who should be in this room in the future and in many rooms around the country to design a different country, we need more hybrid knowledge compared to the past. So the government is revising the categories of degrees. So the university system is still too stiff with silos. I'm very respectful for the academia, but I'm telling you, it is conceived based upon the careers of researchers and the faculty, rather than being hinged upon hybridization. We are moving on, we are progressing, though. These will certainly help for pros more suitable for what we are doing. And second thing, there is a huge opportunity for spaces and learning in schools and universities. So, I belong to a commission, the Culture Commission, and it's not cross-cutting. We are creating joint teams to avoid the silos, because in many things we've realized that this is a constraint. Commission A and Commission B should work together. We have a joint team on AI. We have involved many commissions, culture, TLC, and you name it. So for the upcoming challenges, I believe that the message that we have to convey to the youth is about the choice of the university course. And this is different from my generation. And, I come from Rieti, a small provincial town, and they said, you should go to the university. And there were many efforts to be made by the family. But they asked you, what job do you want to do? The lawyer, the architect, the notary? So what was the problem? That you thought that doctors were all the same and lawyers were all the same. But then you studied law and they said divorces or international mergers. Panic. Because you didn't want neither the one nor the other. So we have to train the youth to reason based upon challenges. So what is the injustice you see in society that you want to help counter in the upcoming 20 years? the question shouldn't be, do you want to be a doctor or an architect, but rather, for example, what part of the city do you want to regenerate in 20 years' time? Probably they don't have the answer, but they should reason by challenges. The goal is not a job, but a good challenge that gives satisfaction and helps the world. So that challenge requires more competencies. I'll close on learning spaces. It's a great disaster, period. Why? And I'm telling you, no one is listening to us here, but there's a lot of work to do if we want to do it. But the PNRR, is a vicious circle. It's stiff in many regards, like the universities and the parliament and the departments of ministries. What do I mean by that? That we've put a lot of money on school canteens. Do you think that we are working to avoid many canteens like the ones that we have that don't work because we have not understood how to change the role of a school canteen? It's not just food, it's more than that. I want to end with fireworks. So we MPs are still rusty in our debate, but not just us. So we've had the pandemic. We found out that everyone had to do remote learning. I always say that's not remote learning, it's pandemic learning. It was so nasty for the schools and universities, but that was inevitable. Having said that, we've understood that technology can help us learn better and teach better. So the dichotomy between all in person or at home is false, according to me. So 25 years ago, so now you know my age, I attended the University of Gorizia. We had very interesting professors. Others, we've lost them. Because if you wanted a Harvard professor, he didn't come to Gorizia. But maybe, video connected, he would have been present. This is a very banal example. But what is the relationship between in person and not in person? And how does architecture change as a result? So the risk I'm seeing is that we are again saying that the past was fantastic. Okay. Here we are again. We were talking with the Honorable Deputy Fusacchia on how to accompany transitions and changes so that they are not empty boxes or wasted money or just a reproposition of schemes that don't work. Let us now dig deeper into reality and in the places where instead this works. In the meantime, we have Tommaso Agassisti, Associate Dean for Internationalization and Quality, Polimi, Graduate School of Management. Thank you for being here. So, with the deputy, we were saying you do so at the Polytechnic University of Milan. How do you enhance the value of teaching through hybridization? What is the avenue, the best avenue, and the avenue that you've taken? First of all, thank you. I'm very happy for this question that comes from the provocative thinking that we've heard a moment ago. This is a very important aspect for redesigning the way in which teachers and students can live their university experience. Luckily, we started before the pandemic. We started to think of the big changes that were occurring in universities and in particular in the post-laureum courses where students start to form advanced skills to enter the labor world and society. So the trends that are occurring, we may or may not like them, but today they're fairly clear. Which? So, for sure, one is more pervasive use of technology at the source, in the regular educational experience. It's normal for a student to have access to materials, experiences, activities, not just on campus, but also through the digital. And this has a huge effect on how to think spaces. And the other element is referred to with a term I don't like, but it's important. It is a transformation of education into pills. You think of the YouTube examples, yes, and they are very long. So I'm talking about the training and education where the specific technical contents are conveyed in a super concise, concentrated manner, super compressed in time and space. And this opens up a big theme. So, what about the relationship between students and teachers? So, imagine that this relationship today is relied upon the fact that I verbally convey in a space, place, and time contents. Let's say that that's debatable. It's been discussed. And the idea is that the time, space, and relationship can be used for something you cannot do through the digital transmission to core, i.e., in-depth discussion and critical spirit. It very much depends upon the discipline. But, for example, do you do that? We do at the Polytechnic University of Milan. Let's say that we are designing innovation in this sense. Let's say so. We have lots of experiences in which this happens. For example, well, we have several master courses that rely upon the idea that the basics of our contents are done online before being done on campus. Almost all of our master courses are done like that. The initial moment is one that is online. So, regardless of place and time, you use those contents online and then you go on campus for advanced contents. Well, this is very much based upon the accountability and independence of students. When you're on campus, you have to know those contents. But all in all, we're doing that. And we are working with high schools. You know, when you do mathematical analysis at the Polytechnic University of Milan, you should know certain tools. If you don't, we have a platform that a student can attend before being on campus, so catching up with the initial contents he or she has to work on. How can you continue to do that? So you talked about the relationship. How can you do all of that and defend all of that without missing out on the relationship that is important for learning? Okay, there are two main avenues or tools. One is the redesign of teaching. I mean, this manner of teaching is not the way we did it in the past. So, what part of the contents can be offline? It's not accidental, it's intentional by redesigning the contents. And the other theme, and this helps me talk about the theme of today, the other theme is space, space is fundamental. In order for the relationship to be on campus or off campus, if you dig deeper, you need to have the space suitable for this. So allowing people to work together, allowing professors to see and interact the students at any point in time. Like, for example, one of the big changes in the spaces in these situations is that, the screen should be in front of you, not at the back. You have to see the students if you're in a digital space. Or if I stop the lecture and say, okay, for the next 30 minutes, you're going to work on this theme, the desk cannot be nailed to the ground. So this is a necessary condition. We're talking about post-university education. And I'm asking you this question because you've worked with the schools. Yes, you have to start very early to allow these skills to burgeon. Yes, of course, no doubt about that. As a matter of fact, the main challenge can be won by starting to do that and taking this avenue. So you have to start from the schools. You also need money. You need monies to be invested because with small tricks, you can do a lot of innovation. We have lots of examples, and we have heard a lot about that. But we have to radically transform spaces, most especially for the universities. And we need to invest money, but we need first to have ideas. So hybrid, flexible, in-depth, not superficial, and collaborative and participative. Thank you, Tommaso Agasisti of the Polytechnic University of Milan. In the meantime, Enzo Baglieri reached me here. We moved to SDA Bocconi School of Management, Associate Dean. Good morning, Enzo Baglieri. This is yet a parallel experience as compared to the one described by Agasisti. It is an experience that maybe also comes from the lesson of the pandemic. How do you put it in practice? Agasisti mentioned a number of things.
Questo punto di vista favorevole, perché noi abbiamo proprio una direzione di strategia anche
we have a strategy wanted by our university. And as you know, most especially those of you who are in Milan, well, we have opened in 2020 the new campus dedicated to the School of Management, and also the architecture was already conceived based upon technology that encourages this hybridization. But how? Can you show me? Well, it's very simple. We have webcams in the rooms following the professor during the lecture and ambient microphones allowing to hear not just the professor, which is the rule, but also the voices of the students. But let's say that honestly, this is just scratching the surface of what we are talking about. Honestly, the previous speakers already said that during the pandemic, we've just transported the typical lesson into the digital space. The real transformation we are talking about consists in the fact that in this logic of the hybrid and contamination of contents and real and virtual put together, we have to very much change our style. Professors are used to be performers, so much so that we talked about ancient Greece. I had prepared some pictures to show you. We can skip it. But, imagine the Greek theater. It has the special shape with the actor at the center. Professors are the same vis-a-vis the students. And so, we have involved architects so that they no longer talked about a static space. You said that your teaching is 1/4 preparation, 3/4 theater. Yes, but in this theater, we don't think of the users, we only think of performers. We tend to be very much performer, we professors, so we are very good when it comes to, delivering contents. But we tend to devote much less time to designing what needs to happen, not just during the lecture, but also after. Education is a transformation. The previous speakers already talked about that, actually. It's not just acquiring contents. This makes sense if this is stuck in your memory. So, in this new style that evolves, we have to learn. We have to use new tools and different points of contact with the students. So we have to design lectures, and we have to learn to design what happens after the lecture. Because, for the purposes of memories, it is important to not just convey contents, but also to preserve the contents and the learning of those contents over time in the minds of the students. And this is the result of what happens if I prepare a lecture appropriately, including by using, this hybridation of reality and digital environments. So I must keep feeding memories. And this needs places, not just training and education. Yes, of course, we cannot say that the youth don't want to discuss with the professors and they prefer a remote location because, this can be more comfortable from a logistics point of view and, it can fix short-term issues. But frankly speaking, just think of when you missed out on a whole day of lectures because previously there were only in-person lectures. With new technologies, no worries. I can keep attending lectures, including in a sad context like the one we are surrounded by today. But students want to stay with us, They want to have this moment of discussion and deep diving because 90% of what we teach are commodities, objectively. They're mostly available anywhere. And, the higher the level of the universities, including for the best in class universities, the more the professors publish on the same magazines and journals and tell the same things. There's not much difference between how I can teach or my colleague from Harvard can do. The real difference is in my ability when I talk to students to transform these contents into something that impacts his memories or her memories. And so I need to be able to reach out to them. So again, we are talking about training. Yes, the basics are available to the students, and students love to learn through socialization. Previously, the classrooms used to look at us. And this is due to the shape of university classrooms. So if we look at them, we understand whether or not they're distracted. And we think that it's their duty to keep being attentive. So if they're distracted, we tell them, shut up, to attract their attention. But in reality, they talk to each other, including about us. I was telling my colleague what happened to me. And, in the past, when I attended the university lectures, I talked to my mates because I wanted explanations. This part of learning now is done through a chat. Previously, we didn't have them. Now, we should imagine that the users are part and parcel of the learning processes. I'll make an example. Yes, and this is a way to turn problems into opportunities. There is one thing that has been a turning point in my experience. Like it was 5 to 6 years ago, I was telling an example, and I said, this thing happened in Le Mans in 1939. And the student, 30 seconds after, said, Prof, no way, it's not possible. It happened in 1939. So, if I had imitated my teachers, I would have slapped him in the face, How dare you debate what I do? I'm the repository of science. But luckily, I reflected and kept at bay my worst impulses, and I asked him, how comes? He said, I Googled it. And as a matter of fact, two things struck me. That he dared debate what I did, and that's objective. They send emails late in the evening on Sunday, and they talk to us very informally, very casually. They don't come in consulting hours. They write, hey, Prof, can I talk to you? So, that's not so bad because it facilitates this dialogue. But then I said, from now on, every time you're here, when I make an example, you check if this is right. And when I don't have an example, you help me find it. And this excited all of the students, and all of them tended to outsmart the others. We have to learn this. because we are not culturally prepared to think that the professor is not the professor, but a facilitator. It's quite a challenge. It's a nice value to defend. Thank you so much, Enzo Baglioni. Hey, Prof. I love that. Thank you so much. So, we are talking about values, also including with respect to the relationship and the spaces. And now we've also seen how the role of the teachers is changing. So not just performers, but also facilitators. And we are talking about the changing role of students as well. But having come thus far, I think it's high time we started to see what and how the environments can do to push these values forward. So now we have the managing partner of Prisma, who carried out many international projects, including for university campuses, based upon crystal clear values in your mind. So we have mentioned some, we have made some examples, we have accompanied these values with challenges by the Polytechnic University of Milan and SDA Bocconi. You've done so starting from the spaces. Can you make some examples? Yes, I worked with them here in Milan with the Polytechnic University and SDA Bocconi, and their stories do resonate with me in quite a lot as to that. Massimo Recalcati explained to us how teaching has changed. And this is Stefano Carone, managing partner of Il Prisma. Anyway, we also have to deal with many more different aspects. So the teacher is not just a performer, but he or she is passionate and has to deal with a legacy that is not fully dominating, but we have to deal with it anyway. And so learning also means knowing, the perimeter of knowledge. This means that we have to know that we can never fully dominate it. And this also means that learning can be done through significant moments, like when we stumble. Some professors have allowed us, by stumbling into something and making a mistake, to change our point of view. At times, this maybe is done thanks to colleagues or classmates or a book, not necessarily through a professor. So in designing spaces, the effort we have to do in the physical and digital space is to give room for stumbling. What can be a constraint may become an opportunity, because in the net, we search information that we are already actively looking for, like Le Mans 1939. It was something that we had already been asked a question about. We hardly search words like accident or stumbling. Are there particularly significant places? Is there a way of conceiving places connected to examples like the ones that you have worked on with the Polytechnic University or Bocconi? Emblematic ways or ways of designing an emblematic places like the agora or the empty spaces that we talked about at the beginning. Yes, they are connection spaces, the in-between spaces. It's not just a precise destination. It's like corridors. Yes, but also the campuses and completely open spaces. So here we have two conflicting dimensions. On the one hand, we try and map values, elements of value, and generative proximities and value-added contents that we can somehow capture. So these in-between moments are catalysts, allowing this multicultural population, because, the university is a moment of discussion with people from around the world with different ideas and different cultures. So you can have different levels and layers of knowledge, professors, researchers, and enterprises and businesses, and the students who, like the deputy said a moment ago, are aiming for their destiny and future. So there is a favorable breeding ground. We have to work on these moments of connection. There are some that are fundamental. First of all, art, because art, once it is set in the public space, it gives us a fresh set of eyes. And then sharing contents, that's another fundamental moment. This is what we are doing right now. The university, in those moments, opens up to the city, and this adds value. And we can design those moments, including in digital agoras. And the library, it's a place of silence, but now it becomes a place of opening up and sharing. Yes, these elements open up, the perimeter of the university vis-à-vis the city and redesign the role of the university vis-à-vis a broader design. Yes, absolutely. And for the benefit of the university that is more contaminated, so to speak, and opened up, but the university can have quite an impact on cities. Ms. Kayembe told us about her effort to bring about change at the University of Edinburgh to reach out to the civil society, however. These two worlds are closely connected. You don't only choose the university, but also the city in which you want to go to the university. So you also choose between multiple cities. So these two worlds are interacting. Okay, so I wish you all the best and keep conveying these values. I think that you're running along the same tracks. So, like we said with the deputy, Mr. Fusakia, don't just fill spaces. We co-design. In both cases, as a matter of fact, we have worked together in close contact. We forced them to work with us. It was a pleasure. We've come up with solutions that weren't there. And this because those who know the experience to be implemented in the campus, it's them. So it is fundamental to involve all of the stakeholders in the process. Yes, because participated design, as we will hear in a moment, certainly is a must. Because with diversity, we put together and aggregate values, and these adds well with experiences and models that apparently seem very far away. And the rector of the University of Edinburgh said the same thing at the beginning. So, this keeps coming up in our conversations, and these are the fundamentals. They are a must if we want to achieve certain goals. Yes. And, we need multiple competencies and skills, strategy and the digital experience need be co-designed. So we need a methodology to have a shared system to deal with this complexity and come up with the best possible solution. You may think we should have known better. Okay, thank you so much, Stefano Carone. We've mentioned synergies that occur in our country, and luckily so. Now, Alessandro Melis, who has been the curator of the Italian Pavilion at Biennale di Architettura in 2021. Can you hear us? Yes, I'm here. Good morning, good evening. Anyway, welcome. Good morning, good day. It's great for me. There's a bright light in your room, actually. So, like I said, you've been the curator of the Italian Pavilion at Biennale dell'Architettura. You teach in New York. Please tell us if these experiences that we are talking about and that happen and are happening and will happen in our country resonate also abroad, based upon what you see and have seen. So what happens outside Italy that can be a source of inspiration? What models do you draw inspiration from in your work? Well, what I've heard about education as a form of facilitation of knowledge and the spaces that need be more multidisciplinary, and the idea that the university must take care of becoming an agent as part of the community and talk to the community. And so research must have an impact that goes beyond the scientific community. So all of this, I would say, is an express policy, most especially in the Commonwealth countries than in the US. There is a system that all the research excellence framework in the UK, but in New Zealand and Australia, there's something similar saying that that is the avenue to be taken. Well, in general, I would say that we kind of breathe an era of crisis of university teaching in general. And this tells us that also the novelty in organizing educational spaces should reduce the amount of knowledge to be conveyed to students. And what we should increase instead is all of those forums that, how shall I say, stimulate inspiration and the creativeness of students. Like Baglieri said, yes, absolutely, absolutely. What Baglieri said very much resonates with what we do every day, because the British government, in this case, for example, talked to us about this. The problem is not that the students are not well prepared, but more often than not, teachers don't have available the technical and cultural tools to, prepare students in a new context. What I'm telling you in a very radical and extreme manner is that if we accept that we are going through an environmental, social, and cultural crisis unprecedented, well, quite clearly, the tools that created that crisis are no longer useful to overcome it. And this poses a clear problem from the point of view of the conception of education that also leads us to reflect on the most important themes of pedagogy and how it can be interpreted. From a practical point of view, so we have, to form the faculty. Yes, that's true. That's a real problem. Essentially, when I talked about the need to come up with or create and build spaces for inspiration and the creativeness of students, like the workshop of Verrocchio, what I mean is that we should give up the idea that the problem that the colleague said previously is this. It is more important that the professor becomes a facilitator rather than looking for a new level of education and new mass of knowledge to be transferred. What is more important instead is to understand how now a teacher, and I'm simplifying, but the teacher is like Verrocchio that has to allow Leonardo da Vinci to be able to, fully express his potential. And, Leonardo da Vinci had a perception of nature and a vision that certainly is different compared to Verrocchio in completely different spaces. So, how can we strengthen this energy? I must say that if we accept this paradigm, it's a political problem, not a technical one, because now the theme of diversity and the fact of emphasizing what is marginal is not ideology. We have to understand that the solutions will come from this, from diversity and from marginal subjects. Is there a difference since you're in New York at the Institute of Technology and teach there? So is there an American point of view that is different from the Italian one in this? You mentioned the Commonwealth, but the US is elsewhere. I mentioned the Commonwealth because I was surprised by the fact that the US, based upon my experience, are halfway through in between New Zealand, Australia, England on the one hand, and Italy and Europe on the other hand. It is a space in which there is a mediation between the radical attempt to modify this idea of education and the more traditional vision. We imagine the US is a jewel, so to speak, of novelty, but this is not the case, according to me, right now. But I would say that if I make 3 examples for architecture in terms of structure of the building, so in practice, I would say that the structure of the building, what is it? What is this transformation? What is a practical result? Well, for example, the Faculty of Architecture in the US and in the mentioned countries has a space devoted to the design lab, and this space is huge, a lot more so than what happens in most universities over here. The Polytechnic of Milan certainly is instead a university that maybe is a world-class one. But from the point of view of the general practice, we see a difference. The classrooms for in-person lectures are disappearing, and the space of the lab is the main working space. For this reason, because it's a given that students in this stage have to be researchers. That's their role. They have to work with a supervisor, a teacher who is a facilitator and who doesn't have the possibility to only convey knowledge. One more example is the so-called student-led research labs. I mean, these units in which there is the idea of the student as a researcher. And the interesting thing of these labs, if we want a comparison with Italy, well, we have to rephrase what a previous speaker said. You know, here in some universities, disciplines are closed space and they are privileged. Instead, these labs have the opposite goal. The reward is given to the ability to associate different disciplines and think out of the box. And Mr. Fusacchia, the deputy, talked to us about that. Yes, these are labs where we have technological tools that you expect to find, like in architectural design spaces like CAD, CNC machines, and 3D printers, and you name it. But we also find the biology lab inside the School of Architecture. We have a chemistry lab in that space, and we have sections where they study the application of, the living together of human and non-human species. And physically, these spaces are very different from the ones we can imagine. Before you leave, one more question. Is there a place? I mean, you've traveled around the world and you've been also the curator of the Italian pavilion at Biennale dell'Architettura. So you worked with different universities. Is there a place or is there an experience that is stuck in your mind and that impressed you most? That can be emblematic of what we're talking about now. Well, it's sentimental, and this takes me back to what has been one of the best experiences from this point of view, from the point of view of education in Auckland, New Zealand, for a number of reasons. First, in any case, we are talking about university that, in any case, is important. It's a leading university in terms of world rankings. But most especially, it is set in a context, in a creative and environmental and cultural context that is extremely different from ours. So they are a driver, a strong driver. That's why they're so significant. And, also the political impact of this educational system in Auckland is present in the idea of the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinta Ardern. The universities are a priority thanks to her in a conservative country. So the university has been an extraordinary driver, and this proves that universities should no longer be or are no longer seen as belonging to a precise cultural sphere. They should be units working and operating already outside the physical and political traditional perimeters, and which as such can have an impact on decision makers. They can seal an agreement. No one thinks today that research is something that must be done inside an ivory tower. If what we do is not meaningful and is not reflected in the better quality of life of people, this is no longer meaningful. So this idea of the university as a sealed-off place doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense because, like you've done in your work and like you do in your work, one has to also open up and include the environment and climate. I know that you've done that when you started designing the Italian pavilion with the so-called resilient communities. That started from the emergency of the climate crisis, because the environment, nature, and biology are part of the crisis, but they're also a set of values in learning. So thank you so much, Alessandro Melis, and thank you for your contribution. Now from New York and Auckland, you were talking about, let's move to Bolzano. Beate, will you join me here? Professor at the University of Bolzano. You're a researcher working on the relationship between pedagogy, architecture, and nature. You've worked a lot on that. And I know that you have with you objects which are very emblematic so that we understand what you do as a researcher, as a pedagogist, and how you've been trying for years to put together, integrate pedagogy, architecture in the defense, as well as the study and the protection of the environment. Over to you. And you do so essentially in schools. Yes, for several years I've tried to understand the connection between pedagogy and architecture in designing school buildings. Well, first of all, I was thinking, as I was listening to the previous speakers, alas, the word pedagogy is so important for this theme. So what is pedagogy at the end of the day? Pedagogy is ultimately thinking about reality from the point of view of education, and it has a proactive, heuristic soul. It's all about understanding how you transform men or women, as to that, through education. This is the key point. And if you don't have this, how can we be politicians? How can we take action? How can we educate? I've been here today knowing that the theme is the university, and I've studied and conducted research, including as a self-taught person, to coach schools. But I thought that we and our university should have this know-how. We have a prestigious building. We've been awarded an architectural prize. It's the single most expensive building ever built in Alto Adige. And, it was not that much loved by the university community, students and professors alike. And this was a strong criticality for the university. And we were starting to think of investing some resources to try and understand what to do. Plus, the students didn't stay in the building. It was, before the pandemic, very difficult for the community of students to stay in the building. And the new dean decided to ask teachers about that, to try and understand how to take action, most especially to create more welcoming common spaces. And so, at that point in time, I stepped in and asked the dean to accompany this process in the light of all of the studies that I had conducted by engaging and involving the teachers and the students in shared design, so that the resources available were known by all, we all were aware of the very few resources available, and we tried to understand how to appropriate them. It was beautiful. The dean didn't expect that by engaging students and professors alike, it was possible to create order and come up with a direction to be followed. And what I've done and what I brought here are symbols of our key elements in our project. The books are all about knowledge, and we've created in the heart of the building not just a library, but also a book crossing space where we put all of the books that are brought by students or that are discarded, so to speak, by the library. And what we have here is a casual space. It's a cozy place where the young can read or sit comfortably on the moquette and the hassocks, so they can be in a safe space. And then, with the students and professors, we've come up with three trajectories, three avenues, and they are the ones we've been working on and are working on quite a lot. One is comfort, so informal spaces and seats that are the symbol of this informal style. And like I said, the building is very classy, very elegant, but also very tough. And the problem is also that these models, more often than not, have to be applied to buildings that can not always be built from scratch. Some have to be reinterpreted and renovated. So we have to export this model. This is the next question for you, actually. Well, I think that this can apply to any school if we want to work with comfortable objects, so hassocks, carpets, couches, which are casual, not formal. These are things that you don't normally find in a school. Secondly, art. Some already talked about that. Well, on that, we've been working hard, and our intention is that of allowing our future teachers and the current students, but also, the teachers that come to attend courses also meet art in an informal manner. They may not go to the museums, they may not know our local artists. Yes, it's a temporary exhibition space with local artists. Selected by a panel of expert students and professors. They temporarily exhibit their works of art to create this special space, and then plants. It's very dear to me, and we have worked during the pandemic on the plants. We realized that we had 40 big plants in the building, but no one was conscious of that. We've enhanced the value of the containers, and we've changed the plants. We've created a community of students that very much loved this, and hence a new focus on green. So much so that during the pandemic, we've explored, the relationship, the educational and teaching relationship with the plants. And when we had to go back in person, with the very few monies spent for these actions, we have proposed to purchase as many plants as would be the students that would be in the two classrooms. So 100 plants for 100 students, 100% plants for 100% students. Plants that were to be the symbol, first of all, of distancing. They were to be a form of partition. They were a symbol of distancing. But they also had to be like a collaborative lab. We've talked a lot about labs here. And we are focused on the idea that we work on cooperation in the labs. So we need the tables that are suitable for this. And the presence of these plants created a condition to ensure, in any case, that students could look at each other when they were in person. And at the same time, they had to be able to work together despite social distancing. What is the hardest hurdle for the implementation of these models and tools? Well, the biggest issue is sustainability of the operation because, we have to be able to regenerate a community of students that keep feeding and nurturing their relationships with the plants on which we are working. I have 200 people who take care of the plants. We also have more students who work on that. We have workshops with kids and engage their teachers. So we are working to create this group that is self-nurturing, self-feeding, and that kind of independently reproduces itself so that we can keep alive our plants, but also art and comfort. We need someone to tidy up the spaces. We need someone to remove unused books or books no one loves, and who creates events with readers and writers and students who also are writers and who talk to each other. So we have to take care of that space. And this is the biggest challenge. And, I've decided to stand publicly behind this. I worked day and night to understand from a pedagogic and didactic point of view how we can do it. If we can do this at the university, I'm pretty sure that it can also be done in schools. So, is there a different difficulty in the various steps of education and training? Well, with schools, it's easier because kids bring their plans to school and then bring them back home. We work with plants. We develop this relationship of proximity thanks to plants. So there is this active interaction with families and kids and teachers. And there's this very deep need to tame and domesticate the school so that you have this interaction between the school and the home. So the school is more domestic and comfortable, so to speak. It's more familiar, like your home. So we have to try and build a community of passionate students who are keen on this theme, who believe it is a pleasure to organize events and take up challenges and do things because, they can burgeon in the world. And I'm talking about responsible actions. And this is a call to action vis-a-vis students. Exactly. That's it. That's it. And this is what we were talking about earlier on with the other guests. Thank you so much, Beate. Thank you for this beautiful opening up. Thank you for telling us how to use keywords, most especially one, pedagogy, that we had neglected. It's fundamental to talk about pedagogy from the school to the university. Let us now move on and take one more step and talk about the labor world. We're going through all of the steps of education, but I'm wondering in terms of work, what's the result of all of this? I'm asking Manlio Ciralli, who should be online. Here I am. What can I tell you? Good afternoon, good evening. Good evening, good evening. It's okay. Okay, good evening. CEO and co-founder of Fedis Place, very much connected to what we are talking about, and it deals with aggregating all of these beautiful values and competencies that should burgeon within spaces, be it schools or universities, and then also, be implemented at work. And this is required when it comes to workplaces. They do need these dynamics and competencies. Feed is the place where you are today. Alas, you don't have electricity. So it's a place that only works when everything works perfectly. It is a project that was started a couple of years ago. In the main, Feed is a project that is totally in the hands of the Adeco group. It was set up in Italy. Can you hear me?
Si sente, non si sente?
Can you hear me? Wait a minute. Don't move. Now, Walter Mariotti, editorial director of Domus, please join me for the time being. Join me. Good evening. Here I am. Okay, now we can have a dialogue.
Ma confermatemi soltanto se mi sentite.
Just let me know if you can hear me.
Adesso in maniera più limpida. Allora, se
vuole now better. So if you want to wrap up, no, I was just telling something about our experience, considering all of the previous speakers and the themes of education, space, and knowledge. You know, we are headed to a totally knowledge-based economy. This is physical space. Today, you don't have electricity, but FEED is a digital platform, the only goal of which is to make people aware, conscious of the educational needs and requirements. So the space becomes the container, but it's also the contents, because we host about 44 weeks per year of events connected to the competencies of the future and the future of work. So we try and make available to people and to many generations. So essentially, we address those who have to make choices and reinvent themselves in the labor market, and we try and convey those contents through the traditional channels. You know, job seekers and businesses and schools and universities don't do this. We are the connection between the requirements of the labor market and the competencies that the traditional educational systems can provide. And today, unfortunately, there are several gaps, despite the fact that we have a good employment rate compared to the past. But there is a huge amount of requests for about 8,000, 10,000 vacancies per week that we cannot fill because there aren't the required competencies. About what? What type of competencies? Well, we are going against the current, because the famous disciplines that have been so well described today, and we've had the Polytechnic University and SDA Bocconi, but not only STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and maths, but also manufacture, in also the novelties introduced by lawmakers or after the pandemic. Today, we lack traditional workers, like in the construction business or in hotels and restaurants, or also with respect to the chemistry and the industrial and manufacturing world. So the difficulty of working with new generation machines is a big difficulty, because we don't have adequate competencies and skills for these new technologies. So people are not available, and businesses don't find these pros, and they're suffering quite a lot. We try and fill as much as possible this gap. More often than not, this is referred to as shortage or misalignment of competencies. This is our focus to improve our country. We're losing the connection with you. So in the meantime, over to Walter Mariotti. Probably you see these challenges in the pages of Domus, and you may have identified the best experiences. Please tell us some of these experiences in connection with the redesign and link between environment, pedagogy, and education. Things we've been talking about so far. So first, thanks for having me here. I'm the last speaker, so I've had the good fortune of listening to the previous speakers. It's a pleasure to answer these questions, but before that, I'd like to go back to some elements that have been dealt with by the previous speakers, and which are part and parcel of my experience and of the experience of Domus, which is not a magazine. It is a system that expresses points of view, critique, pedagogical points of view. We've used the word crisis so many times tonight. From my point of view, this word is reductive because today we have several crises within this crisis. It's a kind of perfect storm. Some talk about fourth globalization, fourth capitalism, but in any case, the present is very complex. It is complex because at the same time, phenomena occur which, are on many layers which are intertwined and superposed. All of this had been foreseen in the French thinkers of the 60s and in Germany in the 30s. But for a number of reasons, that depend upon the places of education. And the colleague Beate talked about space, and according to some, the space is the third educator, like Malaguzzi. But there's one more fact, i.e., that we keep moving on based upon a model of school and education that is still that of De Amici's, a 19th century one. And Professor Baglieri told us about his instincts when listening to the reaction of the students. So you mentioned Vernon, but the classical thinkers and the contemporary thinkers are very different because many things happened in between. We should think back of the ecclesiastical thinkers and the frocks and the teacher's desk. The teacher's desk separate the wishes of teachers from the wishes of students. And Jean-Pierre Vernon studied the institutions and studied the Freudian dynamics of the institutions. And Stefano Carone, managing partner and founder of Prisma, mentioned Recalcati, and I would go back to the origin and would mention Hillman and Plato. I mean, there's no teaching without seduction, i.e., the ability to seduce and to inspire. Someone talk about enthusiasm. Enthusiasm means allowing those who listen to you to find the passion, the deity, the God inside you. This is enthusiasm. So the crisis of the school comes from the fact that today the space is like architecture and what finance was in the 90s, and that politics represented in the 60s. It is a matrix of society. It is no longer a vertical knowledge for experts about the management of spaces or dark places. No way. Architecture is a place where you connect things. It is a way. It is a system. Yes, it is a system, a way that, coupled with time, aggregates experiences. And from this point of view, architecture and design are fundamental in our society, alongside art. I'm saying so because they are those that make it possible to change our habits. Architecture today is central because architecture is no longer about the management of a square, but also the users of that square, on the one hand. And on the other hand, we're in Italy and we have to use numbers when we say things. 86% of our school buildings are not school buildings, not at all. They've become school buildings by operation of law, because local administrations have transformed facilities, because they didn't think of how to build places, because thinking and places were separate. I mentioned De Amicis. And then there are examples of schools with Ivan Illich that renovated place in Don Lorenzo Milani. And there have been schools that have disrupted the order of the distinction, of the universitas. This was the university in the Middle Ages, the place where you participated in knowledge through three moments: lectio, discutio, and disputatio. So this difference comes in our country after the Counter-Reformation with the Spanish Catholicism, and where the language of professors became elusive because you couldn't say some things. So we cannot think of the third educator without thinking of the digital revolution and without thinking of the history of our country that is one of superposed layers. And this means schools which weren't conceived as schools. And then there's one more transformation, the digital transformation. And this transformation is extraordinary, but it works like all of the other revolutions. So from one technology it becomes a platform for connecting with reality. Zygmunt Bauman said that we have connections, not relationships, because the model is the network. And the last point has already been mentioned when they talked about green and greenery. And Domus talks about that. Domus was established in 1938 with three guys. One was a Jesuit priest. He went away almost immediately. The other one was Joe Ponti, a brilliant young architect. And then a young man from the Marche region wanted to become a publisher. He was Gianni Mazzocchi. These three people are fundamental, and Gianni Mazzocchi was the editor of Domus and Panorama, L'Europeo, and many more, and Il Mondo. I'm saying so because art is fundamental. It remains fundamental because it makes it possible to see society from a different point of view. And I'm sorry, I know Fusato many well, but politics are no longer central. But art instead shows a different point of view, exactly like politics used to do 40 and something years ago. And this is important for education. For the first time, the digital revolution allows people to acquire knowledge. And so we no longer have repositories of knowledge. And we acknowledge that some people like Baglieri are real repositories of knowledge. But I agree with you, we have to put together different types of knowledge and different periods of time. But yes, you're right. This process, when it is too sudden, takes a long while to digest it and emphasize its value. We are still in this phase, maybe because the pandemic, has been a disruption. And so we need to digest these little revolutions and we have to think about it. So since we've talked about educational processes and we've had an in-run in the world of labor with Manlio Ciralli talking about competencies. Now, I have a provocative question. We've talked about learning environments in pedagogical and educational processes at school, at the university. We talked about post-lauream spaces. But at the workplace, what is the role of spaces and places? Well, over the last 2 years, we've kept educating people in a 100% digital manner. We've seen that it works to an extent because you miss out on empathy and proximity amongst people, and this becomes exchange and parallel knowledge, and you name it. So places will continue to become central up until the time they will retain their feature of being a driver for co-design and co-thinking. So the idea of a transmitter and a receiver is over. It's outdated. We cannot hear you. Okay, next time. Next time.
Ok. Ce la mettiamo.
Ok.
Mettiamocela come sfida per.
It's our challenge.
Lo faremo un'altra volta.
We'll do it next time.
Devono accompagnare anche quelli in cui lavorano perché l'idea è quella di lavorare.
The idea is that of also working to have pleasant spaces where you can be educated according to principles and values that we've dealt with today. So I'd like to thank you all. We talked about integrated universities that are part of a broader system like a city. So I'd like to quote Calvino with Invisible Cities. He talks about the cities, but I'm also thinking of university cities and all of the systems that can be a glue and encourage, the relationships. He said that cities are places to exchange goods, values, and wishes and memories, and I would add values and challenges. Today, we've seen several challenges. I wish you all the best, and I thank you so much, all of you, for your attention.